We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
January 28th, 1986. Patriots around the nation, engineers around the world, and children with dreams sat with bated breath as the long-awaited 10th launch of the Challenger started its broadcast on national television. Mission 51L, as it's officially known, had already been delayed 3 times, increasing the public's eagerness and expectations for the shuttle. Unbeknownst to them, icicles had formed on the launch pad, and the frigid temperatures increased concerns over the probability of a successful launch. The concerns were brought to the manager's attention, who promptly decided to prioritize a safe launch and postpone it to a later date. Except, this did not happen that day. NASA's decision to go through with the launch had fated the 7 crew members to death and had been a blow to NASA's mission for exploration. NASA's irresponsible penny-pinching approach to the shuttle project enabled an inevitable disaster on the scale of the Challenger launch, one that violated the rights of the astronauts, wasted taxpayer money, and hindered America's ability to advance in space. From its inception, Mission 51L was to be unique. It was the first flight of the Teacher in Space program, former President Ronald Reagan's brainchild. For months leading up to the launch, the selected teacher, Sharon Krista McAuliffe, had won the hearts of the American people. With television being a staple of the American family in the 1980s, NASA capitalized on public interest through frequent broadcasts of McAuliffe. The idea was to increase national interest in STEM, especially among the youth, by sending a teacher on a space shuttle mission. From space, Krista McAuliffe was to conduct 2 lessons about basic science that would be telecast down to Earth and inspire the children of America. This program, which rode heavily upon being shown during school times, would be successful only if deadlines were met. McAuliffe's team, which included 6 other astronauts, was to train vigorously for the mission and be invariably prepared. Among these 6 astronauts was the commander, Francis R. Scobie. Having had experience on previous missions like STS-41C, Scobie had proven to be an invaluable member of NASA's program. Other seasoned astronauts on the shuttle include the 3 mission specialists. Ronald E. McNair, the first mission specialist, had been the second Black American in space between February 3rd and 11th, 1984, by flying on the Challenger shuttle mission STS-41B. The next 2 mission specialists, Judith A. Resnick and Ellison S. Onizuka, were also highly qualified, being the second American woman in orbit and the first Asian American in space, respectively. Little needs to be said to show the qualifications and importance of every crew member to NASA and the world. Their lives were not disposable. With their assignment to the Challenger, the decorated crew had not only signed away their rights to life insurance and their rights to sue NASA, inadvertently, they'd signed away their lives and the lives of their families. Indubitably, the unnecessary loss of these astronauts provoked an infringement on the rights of the crew and their families. The warning signs, which had been made obvious by several of the engineers, had shown to the public that NASA cared more about launch dates than the lives of their astronauts.
And we were both angry. We were both angry to know that it could have been prevented. It was a sad day when we learned it could have been prevented.
Before the shuttle program, the United States' space effort was largely centered on the Apollo program, with the final goal of putting the first American man on the moon. While this goal directly appealed to many in Congress, primarily due to fears of Soviet advancement into space, the program was costly, with the launch of a single Saturn V rocket costing upwards of $300 million. When the US succeeded in 1969, Congress saw little use in funding NASA, especially with the war in Vietnam reaching new heights. For NASA, this meant a swift change from being a government-funded civilian research institute to working closely with the Department of Defense and operating from a more conservative budget. This was an open violation of the National Aeronautics and Space Act of 1958, which declared that NASA was explicitly not to focus on military research objectives. As a result, the shuttle design had to be stronger to facilitate both military and civilian experiments, while still operating on a tight budget. Richard C. Cook, a NASA whistleblower, described the shuttle program as having serious mechanical problems that were discussed mainly behind closed doors. Richard P. Feynman, a theoretical physicist on the Challenger Investigation Committee, said that
the people at the top who are talking to Congress don't want to hear this, and so they discourage information for moving up.
Therefore, NASA's management violated the public's rights by exaggerating the space shuttle's efficacy to congressmen, wasting valuable public resources that could have been used on a safer and more efficient system that stayed true to NASA's original goals. NASA's actual decisions can only be explained by understanding how an O-ring on a solid rocket booster works. Due to combustion forces, gas likes to escape from the motor in an uncontrolled and unsafe manner. To prevent critical failure, the solid rocket motors had rubber rings on all of the field joints of the motor. These rings were referred to as O-rings. The motor and rings were manufactured by a Utah-based company known as Modern Thiokol. Yet, the O-rings had an issue. The immense heat caused massive amounts of erosion to occur on the O-rings. Over multiple launches, the erosion on the O-rings built up. If the O-rings eroded enough, they could break and cause gas to escape the motor, leading to a catastrophic explosion. In an internal memo to Thiokol's VP of Engineering, R.K. Lund, Engineer R.M. Boisjolet expressed his concern over the potential of a failure in the O-rings, stating that if we do not take immediate action to dedicate a team to solve the problem with the field joint having the number one priority, that we stand in jeopardy of losing a flight along with all the launch pad facilities. His concerns went unheeded, showing irresponsible behavior on the part of Modern Thiokol. 6 months later, the Challenger tragedy occurred. A private agency was cutting costs and ignoring safety, while NASA was none the wiser, verifying shuttles for future launches as if there were no glaring safety concerns. This negligent behavior led to the Challenger disaster.
He got so exasperated, I think at one point he declared, he said, "Well, what do you want me to do, Thiokol? Wait till spring?" Well, he probably should have waited.
At noon on January 27th, NASA and Thiokol attended a teleconference in which the Thiokol engineers expressed their concerns over potential safety issues and urged NASA to issue yet another delay to noon on January 28th. By this point, even the astronauts believed that the upcoming morning's launch would be delayed to a later time. After evaluating further, Thiokol engineers came to the unanimous conclusion that it was not safe to launch on the 28th due to the frigid temperatures. A previous shuttle launch, the Discovery STS-51C, had many O-ring related issues because it flew at a temperature of 53 degrees Fahrenheit. In this launch, the Challenger would be flying in conditions much colder than that. NASA had made it extremely clear that they are against the recommendation and that they would have to reevaluate their relations with Thiokol if unnecessary delays were made. Thiokol executives, under immense stress over their contract with NASA, urged their engineers to take off their engineering hats and put on their management hats. Despite this, all the engineers refused to sign off. The managers, wishing to please their partners at NASA and secure future partnerships, decided that they would abandon the engineers' warnings and clear the launch, which would lead to the Challenger explosion. Essentially, NASA had strong-armed a private contractor into agreeing to a launch even when their engineers knew it was unsafe. Thus, Thiokol failed in its responsibility to ensure that its recommendation was based on the expert opinions of the engineers with a scientific approach, and NASA failed in its responsibility to ensure the safety of the astronauts by making all concerns abundantly clear. NASA and Modern Thiokol violated the astronauts' rights to be treated as human beings by turning a blind eye to safety concerns.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd planned to speak to you tonight to report on the State of the Union. But the events of earlier today have led me to change those plans. Today is a day for mourning and remembering.
President Reagan created the Rogers Commission, which was responsible for investigating and reporting the Challenger accident. As NASA scrambled to investigate the cause of the crash and research possible solutions, the shuttle program was effectively halted for 2 years after the tragedy. Had they been diligent the first time around, this hiatus would have never occurred, allowing for there to be further advancements made in space travel. NASA stubbornly soldiered on with the shuttle program, again showing its proclivity to safety incidents with the Columbia disaster in 2003. The scale of negligence within NASA in the 1980s meant that a tragedy on the scale of the Challenger disaster was inevitable. It just so happened that the unlucky 7 on board the Challenger were the ones who had to die to show the nation the true nature of NASA. The reusable spacecraft, as NASA proclaimed, could launch over 60 times a year without fail. In their irresponsible decision to chase this fantasy, NASA violated the rights of the astronauts and their families, wasted taxpayer money, and set America back in its goal of conquering space.